today.
From CBC News, The World this hour, I'm Angela Scapatora. U.S. President Donald Trump says he wants to ban the social media app TikTok. Speaking to reporters on Air Force One, Trump says he'll issue an executive order as early as today. TikTok is owned by a Chinese company, and the Trump administration says the app could be used by the Chinese government to harvest data. But the company says it operates independently from Beijing. Women's rights advocates are concerned over the sentencing of an Edmonton nightclub promoter convicted of multiple sexual assaults. A judge has ordered Matt McKnight serve 8 years in prison. It's less than half of what the prosecution was seeking, and victims say it's far too lenient. Rafi Boudjikanian reports.
He's been doing this for years.
That's one of the 13 women who came forward to accuse Matt McKnight of sexual assault. 17 at the time, her identity is protected by a publication ban. For years, McKnight worked as a bar promoter at the now defunct Knoxville's Tavern in Edmonton, where many of the women say he met them and plied them with drinks before taking them to his condo. A jury found McKnight guilty of 5 counts of sexual assault. Crown prosecutor Mark Heiser Wairinga asked for 22 and a half years of jail time.
That was a carefully considered determination.
But a judge found McKnight remorseful and put him behind bars for 8 years. Lise Gautel says the sentence will hardly act as a deterrent for sexual predators. She's a professor of women's studies at the University of Alberta.
What sensible person would come forward knowing the mistreatment that these women endured?
Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Edmonton.
Before we knew how widespread this pandemic would be, travel was fueling the surge of COVID-19 cases. A new study has found that most early cases outside China have links to people who flew to one of 3 countries. And as Megan Williams reports, Italy is top of the list.
It was people who traveled here to Italy in the early months of 2020 who inadvertently spread the virus to other places, accounting, say researchers, for more than a quarter of the early COVID contagion outside China. That's the finding of a study carried out by researchers at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention who published their results this week. They examined publicly available data to trace the early spread of COVID in the 11 weeks before the World Health Organization declared it a pandemic on March 11th.
That COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
In that same early period, the study shows travel to China was linked to about 20% of cases and to Iran to about 10%. Data for low-income countries and for Africa were not available, and researchers say the spread in those areas could be different. Megan Williams, CBC News, Capri.
After the NHL season was paused in late March, players returned today with the beginning of the Stanley Cup playoffs. This year no fans will be in the stadium, but that isn't the only difference. Ian Hadamansing has more.
Unprecedented and unpredictable. Those words describe the pandemic, and they sure fit this summer's Stanley Cup playoffs. More than 2 months after the cup is usually awarded, some wonder if the 2020 winner should have an asterisk after its name. And the commissioner of the NHL, Gary Bettman, says maybe.
If there's an asterisk, it's going to be because this was harder to win than at any other time in the modern age.
Isolated in Edmonton and Toronto, tested every day for COVID. For the first time, some teams may end up playing 5 rounds.
We now have a play-in round, so 24 teams are involved. It's going to be really hard to win the cup.
COVID is not the only major issue the NHL is dealing with. In a summer of anger over anti-black and anti-Indigenous racism, the league says there will be a, quote, social justice theme to today's pregame events. Ian Hadamansing, CBC News, Vancouver.
And that is The World this hour. I'm Angela Scapatora.
From CTV News at 7:18 a.m. today.
Hello, I'm Andrea Bain from the CTV Newsroom in Toronto. Here are the top stories. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau continues to face fallout over the week controversy after admitting he should have recused himself. The Ontario government has now severed its ties with We Charity, expressing concern over allegations against the organization. They now join Good Life Fitness, Royal Bank of Canada, Loblaws, and KPMG, who also cut ties with We. Well, details are expected to be rolled out in the coming weeks about the federal government's plan to transition out-of-work people off the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and onto a slightly revamped employment insurance system. And Canadians can now download the new COVID-19 exposure notification app to help track the spread of the virus. This as the country's biggest city finally moves forward to stage 3 of reopening. And Hurricane Isaias has already damaged homes and blown over trees as it made its way through the Bahamas this morning. It's now headed toward Florida as the state continues to grapple with the COVID-19 pandemic. For all the day's top stories and breaking news as it happens, tune to CTV News Channel or go online to ctvnews.ca. I'm Andrea Bain.
From CNBC Tech Check at 3:46 p.m. yesterday.
Happy Friday. I'm Deirdre Boza, and here's your CNBC Tech Check. Big numbers from Big Tech's Big Four. Let's start with Apple. The company smashing expectations last quarter, posting revenue gains across every one of its product categories. iPhone sales returned to growth, driven by strong sales in China and robust demand for the iPhone SE. But the real winning products were iPads and Macs, thanks in large part to the work-from-home trend. Apple also announced a 4-for-1 stock split, meaning everyone who currently owns the stock will get 3 more shares after the market closes on August 24th. The stock will begin trading on a split-adjusted basis on August 31st. Moving on to Amazon, the e-commerce juggernaut posted a blowout quarter, netting $5.2 billion in profit. That is the company's biggest quarterly profit in its 26-year history, and it comes despite spending $4 billion on coronavirus-related costs between April and June. Total revenues last quarter grew 40% year over year to $88.9 billion. Meanwhile, online grocery sales, they tripled. Last but not least, Facebook, the social media giant, beat Wall Street estimates on profits and sales. The company is also forecasting growth in ad revenue despite a boycott from some key advertisers and cutbacks amid the pandemic. CEO Mark Zuckerberg stressed that Facebook is not reliant on big businesses, like the brands that are boycotting, saying that the top 100 advertisers account for just 16% of sales, down from 20% last year. That's all from the West Coast. See you back here next week.
From DW Newsbrief at 7 a.m. today.
This is DW News, and these are our top stories. Thousands have gathered in Berlin from across the country to demand an end to coronavirus restrictions. Conspiracy theorists, anti-vaxxers, and right-wing extremists are among those attending. It comes as Germany braces for a potential second wave of the virus as new infections soar. U.S. President Donald Trump says he'll take action to ban the Chinese-owned video app TikTok. U.S. officials are currently looking into TikTok's potential threat to national security. Trump's announcement follows reports that he's also planning to order TikTok's owner, ByteDance, to sell its U.S. operations. Hurricane Isaias is churning through the Caribbean, bringing strong winds and flooding in Puerto Rico and some islands of the Bahamas. A hurricane warning has been issued for parts of Florida, where the storm is expected to hit later on. Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam has postponed September's legislative council elections by 1 year, citing the risk of coronavirus infection. The vote would have been Hong Kong's first since a controversial security law was brought into effect. This is DW News from Berlin. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at DW News, or visit our website, dw.com.
Okay, guys, let's move on to the podcast.
Stop. That's not how it's supposed to go.
Explained, I'm Sean Ramaswamy. It's Friday, it's summer. We're going back to Today Explained summer camp for the kids today. This week, we're talking about the election. Remember the election? We're still a couple of months away from it, fewer than 100 days, I believe. But believe it or not, the election for president on the island of Explained is happening today. Reporter camp counselor Noam Hassenfeld is live on the scene.
Hey, Sean, I'm here in Electric City, the capital of the island of Explained, really getting psyched for today's election.
And what is it like out there in Electric City? What's the energy like?
There are parades, there are marching bands out here, there are voters with signs, there's going to be speeches. I mean, it's really...
Noam, is that you?
Bert Pinkerton, nice to see you. I'm actually talking with Sean right now about the island of Explained election.
Oh, so that's what's going on here. I was really confused. Do you mind if I listen in?
Actually, Sean, would you mind if I just take Bird around the island? I can let you and the audience listen in, too.
Sure, I'll go get some popcorn.
Hey, Bird, let me take you over this way. Let's head over to the city center.
Oh, okay, so this was actually one of my questions. The signs in that parade over there are super intense. Like, now or never, later is greater. What is that all about?
Oh, yeah, so the island of Explained has two big political parties.
Oh, this does look like a party. That explains the balloons and the confetti and the colorful fireworks in the middle of the day. Is there cake?
No cake. It's not really that kind of party. A political party is a bunch of people who come together because they sort of have the same political ideas. And they basically pick one person who's really good at talking about the ideas, and they say, hey, you should be our pick to run for president.
Oh, so like we have the Republicans and the Democrats in the U.S.
Exactly.
Yeah. I still think the party with the cake would be better.
Oh, there's one of the candidates right now, Happy Now Year from the Now Party, and it looks like he's got a megaphone.
You know what I hate? Waiting. The later party is always saying, you get things later, later, later. But I say, let's get them now. So what are you waiting for? Vote for me. Happy Now Year right now. Now or never.
Now or never. Okay, so it sounds like there's the Now Party, and they're a little impatient.
Yeah, true. And then there's the Later Party, and that's run by the Later Gator.
You know what happens when you get everything now? You don't end up with anything later. Later is greater. Save your vote for later. And me, the Later Gator.
Oh, it looks like the two parties' parades are all headed towards that giant stage over there.
Yeah, the candidates are about to give speeches, and that's sort of their best chance to explain their ideas. Then everyone gets a chance to vote. In the U.S., there's a whole bunch of speeches and events over the course of like a year or more, but here on the island, it all just takes a day.
Can we go listen in?
Yeah, of course.
Now presenting the town hall for the president of this great island of Explained.
Wow, some of these voters definitely look under 18.
Oh yeah, the island of Explained is kind of different from the U.S. They let kids vote here, and it looks like the first couple rows are filled with students.
And now, without further ado, our first candidate representing the Now Party, Happy Now Year.
When I was a kid, someone from the Later Party told me to save all my Halloween candy and eat it later. So I put my Halloween candy in a drawer. And you know what? When I went back to get some of that candy 2 days later, it was full of ants. I had to throw it all out. And ever since then, I've known that whatever you have to use it now. I promise to build bridges and houses now. And I will require everyone to eat all their candy immediately. Vote for now, right now.
Now or never. Now or never. Next up, from the Later Party, the Later Gator.
My wise mother, Lady Later, used to tell kids to save their candy on Halloween. And yes, some of them got ants in their candy, but I can't count the number of kids who wrote my mom letters, thanking her for all the candy they still had in December. Saving is hard, but it makes good things last a long time. I promise to save our money in case something bad happens, like a hurricane. And I will outlaw eating candy until 3 weeks after you get it. And to the Now Party, I say, don't stop me now.
Okay, we're ready for the question and answer section. Does anyone have any questions or comments? We'll start by passing microphones around to the students. You there.
I think that now is moving a little too fast. It should take a little more time, because what are we going to do if we don't have any more money for the hurricanes?
Mr. Nowyear, should we save all our money in case a hurricane comes?
No. I think we need things now, and we'll worry about later, if later ever comes. We need new houses. Hurricanes, that's a later problem.
You said you needed new houses. That means you already have houses.
Ms. Gator?
Yeah, that's true. And we should wait till later to see if we need more houses.
You know, hermit crabs switch out their shell houses all the time. Are you trying to say hermit crabs shouldn't be allowed to move?
Hermit crabs are not how we should be running our island. They're crabs.
Correct.
Thank you.
Hermit crabs and humans are not the same.
Thank you.
We are not 1 inch tall. We grew up to 7 feet.
Yeah.
We're stronger than them.
Yeah.
I happen to be 2 inches tall.
That's a lie.
I think you guys should join together, because now is too now and later is too later. You guys should join together and it'll be the perfect time.
I agree, because you shouldn't spend all the money, but you shouldn't just save it.
Miss Gator, could you work together with Mr. Nowyear?
I'm scared that if I start working with those now people, the next thing you know, everyone's going to want everything now. And I feel like this is our moment to say, not now, later.
It's almost like you're saying, right now is your moment?
No. Well, yeah, now is our moment.
Sounds like a Now Party phrase to me.
Oh snap.
Expose.
Things just got spicy.
If we don't vote for now, there won't be a later.
That is deep.
I agree, because if you want something, you really need it. If you burn, there ain't gonna be no later, so what's the point?
All right, folks. Please proceed to the voting platform to vote.
Oh, and Bert, this is another difference from the U.S. In the U.S., it's secret voting. On the island of Explained, they announce their votes.
I'm voting for later, because if there is a hurricane, we'll have enough money to rebuild houses and all the other stuff we need to rebuild our island.
Later is never going to come. Now is always there. And one day you're going to regret that you didn't do it now. If I had to choose, I would vote for now.
My vote is right now. If you really need something, how you gonna get across? You got nothing to get across the ocean besides a bridge. So that's why I vote with now.
If you're in a fire and then you're like, oh, I'll do it later, it's not going to end well for you.
If we need a bridge, we need it now. If we need a new road, we're going to kind of need that.
I vote for later because I like to save up all my money.
It would probably be now.
I vote for later.
For now or later?
For later.
For now.
For now.
For now. Sounds like an interesting name.
Okay, it's time to count every last vote.
I'm so jazzed, Mom. I can't wait to find out who won.
Yeah, so these were just the votes in the capital, Electricity here, but they still have to collect all the votes from all over the island, so we'll find out who won the election after the break.
Support for our show today, yes, comes from another show, but no, is not like all those other shows, because this show is hosted by Michelle Obama. It's called The Michelle Obama Podcast, and it's on Spotify right now. The series brings listeners inside the former First Lady's most candid and personal conversations, and it shows them what's possible when they allow themselves to be vulnerable, to open up, and to focus on what matters. And Robinson,
I remember I used to have a American Democrat do right, measure the conformed, and...
Hey, Bert, you ready to hear the election results?
Heck yes, I am.
And the results are in. The Now Party got 230 votes in Electricity, and the Later Party only got 125. So Now has won Electricity.
Now or never!
As for total votes, Now got 348 votes across the entire island. The Later Party only got 300.
So the Now Party won.
Well, hold on just a second.
Over to the Electoral College. Later got 10 states, and Now only got 1. So because Later won the Electoral College 10-1, that means Later has won the election.
Wait, what? But Now got more votes. What's going on?
So Now did get more votes, but like you heard, Later won in the Electoral College.
College, like university?
Not exactly. This is a different kind of college. The Electoral College is just a fancy name for the strange way that the Island of Explained counts votes in an election.
Man, parties that aren't parties, colleges that aren't colleges. This island is bananas.
Give it a chance, actually. The Electoral College means that we count states instead of people. Electricity is one of these states, but there are actually a whole bunch of other states on the island.
Why would you count states instead of people?
Okay, it's kind of confusing, but it's actually a way to make sure that everyone's opinion is heard. It might actually help if we zoomed out a bit. Or, actually, let's zoom up a bit. I've got these little jetpacks here. I think we can get a better view.
All right, I'm always up for a jetpack. Let me
Grab your seatbelt.
strap this on. Safety first. Holy God! Non, you can see the whole island from up here.
Yeah, there's Electricity down there you can see.
Wow! I didn't realize how many people there were. They look almost like ants from all the way up here.
Yeah, and then look around. There's the Knock on Woods over there, the side aisles, and you can even see the 1, 2, 3 forest way back over there.
Wow, those places look like they have barely any people.
Yeah, exactly. These are really rural places. There's usually only a few people in each one, and they're almost always big Later Party supporters.
Got it.
And that's actually kind of why we count states instead of people, to give these Later Party people more of a voice. Let me actually just show you some of these Later places. Here, we could just switch these jetpacks to hyperdrive.
Heck yeah, hyperdrive.
One of the states on the island that really loves the Later Party is the Rabbit Hole. Let's check it out.
Wow. Who knew that the history of the color beige could be so interesting? I'm so glad I have 7,000 more pages left in this book.
Well, that sounds like a Later project if I ever heard one.
And if you come over here to the 1, 2, 3 forest...
How much of my berry harvest should I turn into jam for the winter? All of it?
They're also thinking long term.
At the same time, all the way back in Electricity, they are all about the now.
Ugh, get out of my way.
I'm walking here. I'm walking here.
All right.
Okie doke.
Ugh, jetpacking is always so bad for my back.
Stretch it out.
Okay, I think I'm following so far. So, I was confused why we count states instead of people, but you just showed me that most of the island is rural. There aren't that many people who live out there, and most of them like the Later Party. And then meanwhile, in the city, people usually like the Now Party, and the city has a ton of people. So the Electoral College counts states instead of people, so that Electricity doesn't have too big a voice in the election. Is that right?
Exactly, yeah.
But I'm still not totally clear on how it all works.
It works like this. Each of the states on the island, Electricity, the Knock on Woods, Deep Dive Lake, all these states, they each count up their votes and decide who won the state.
Okay, so when Now won Electricity by like a lot, that just didn't matter?
Well, it sort of mattered. Now did get the most votes in Electricity, but that's only one state. The Later Party won all the other states, all 10 of them.
Wait a second. If each state counts the same, but there's way more people in Electra City than in the Knock on Woods, then one person's vote in the Knock on Woods is way more powerful than one of these voters here in Electra City. Excuse me, all of you who just voted, how do you feel about that?
This is corrupted.
This is rigged. Now are the winners.
It's fair but unfair.
I don't even know. It's like a tie.
I'm half and half on the situation because I do think it's fair that there's the electoral college and stuff, but I don't think it's fair how a lot of people voted for now and later won.
So do you think it would be more fair if we just counted people instead?
Yes, I think that's fair, because that's where most of the people live. That is so fair. Now, deserve the W.
Yeah, and a lot of people in the U.S. feel like this too.
Oh, that's right, because the U.S. has an electoral college system too.
Yeah, the Island of Explained model is actually based on the model in the U.S. I've got a friend who works in a library here, actually. I wonder if we should go pay her a visit. I bet she could explain the way it works in the U.S.
You know I love a library, Noah.
Just remember, it's a lot quieter in there.
Okay, I'll whisper.
Bird, this is Lee, the librarian.
Hey, Lee. And I hope you don't mind. We also brought some student voters along.
Hi, voters.
We were just talking about the Electoral College here on the island, and it's pretty similar to the Electoral College in the U.S., right?
Yeah, they're pretty similar. Things are a little more tricky in the U.S. On the island, every state counts the same. But in the U.S., the states with more people count for a bit more.
Got it.
But at the end of the day, the island and the U.S. are pretty close because they both pick presidents based on the states, not just on how many people voted.
Okay, interesting. So, the Island of Explained based their system on the U.S., but how did the U.S. even come up with this model?
There were a few reasons for it. The first is that the founders wanted to make sure that smaller states that had fewer people also had a voice.
Oh, just like on the island.
Exactly. Another one is that the founders thought that people might not have enough information to vote directly for president. It's kind of complicated, but the founders thought that the Electoral College would be a way around giving the people too much power. But we also need to talk about some of the country's ugly history here. When the Electoral College was made in the U.S., slavery actually played a huge role. Back then, a lot of people in the southern states were enslaved, and enslaved people weren't allowed to vote. Actually, let me grab a map. Take Georgia over here. Enslaved people couldn't vote, so southern states like Georgia didn't have a lot of voters. A state like New York, all the way up here, had way more people who could vote. The South pushed to use the Electoral College, so states there could have roughly about the same amount of say in who got to be president as states in the North. It wasn't just about slavery, but it was a lot about slavery.
But we don't have slavery anymore, so why is the Electoral College still around?
For one, it's really hard to change, and for another, the people who like it want to keep it around because they see it as continuing to give small states more power compared to larger states.
I don't really like that we have this system that has so much to do with slavery. What about you guys?
If we were still living like that, I would be a slave.
I think we should get a new voting system.
I would change the system no matter what.
On top of its connections to slavery, the Electoral College is still a big obstacle to change in America, and many see it as an undemocratic system. Just like on the Island of Explained, every person's vote doesn't count the same. So a couple of recent presidents have actually gotten the most votes and still lost the election. Kind of like what happened to the Now Party.
Okay, so voters, what do you think? Should we keep the Electoral College?
I think we should change it.
It's like electricity. Their vote really doesn't matter because if all the other places vote for later,
then what's the point of voting in the first place? So I feel like we should probably change it.
I think we need to change it because everybody matters.
I think we should change it because it's not fair.
I think you should count everyone the same.
Let's say there's a lot of votes for a good president, and there's like very little votes for a very horrible president, and the horrible president gets chosen instead of the good president. We should change it.
So, Lee, should the U.S. get rid of the Electoral College?
If we want to have a democracy where everyone's vote counts, we should really think about changing it.
I mean, it's been around for a while. Is it even possible to change it?
It's definitely possible to do so. Some people who ran for president have even proposed plans to change it, and there are other ideas out there to change it too. So even though it is really tough to change a system like this, just because it's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
Well, thanks for explaining all of this to us, Lee.
Yeah, I'm glad I understand how this works now, even if it is kind of complicated.
Thanks for coming to my library.
Okay, Bird, I think it's about time we jetpack out of here. I think we can just make it if we aim for that open archway down there.
See you in 2 weeks, Silas.
Today Explained summer camp counselors Noam Hassenfeld and Bird Pinkerton. Jillian Weinberger edited today's episode. Efim Shapiro engineered with the help of his son Harvey, his other son Louie, and his wife Steph. Vox's editorial director of podcasts, Liz Kelly Nelson, helped a bunch too. And we had help from Amanda Northrup, Rachel Giannini, Salim Hugh Penny, Lauren Katz, Jamila Various, and Rachel Israel. Thanks to Lee Zoe, who played the island's librarian, and a special thank you to all the kids who came to the island with us. Kyra, Marco, Eric, Jacob, Micah, Mateo, Kelly, Anthony, Diana, Gio, Kalani, Angela, Damari, and Isaiah. You can spend more time on the Island of Explained with a set of activities we put together for you to do with your grown-ups and to do with your kids. Are you team now or team later? What about your family? What about your friends? Go to Vox.com/TodayExplainedKids for a discussion guide and activities on phone banking, tallying election results, and creating the perfect persuasive speech. Again, that site is Vox.com/TodayExplainedKids. The rest of the Today Explained team includes Bridget McCarthy, Halima Shah, Mooj Zaidi, and Amina Al-Sadi. We had extra help this week from Paul Mounsey. Cecilia Lay checks the facts. The mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder is our booster, and the show is part of the Vox Media Podcast Network. All right!
This episode was brought to you by Snailsman Slime. Slime, slime, snailsman slime. All you need is snailsman slime. 10 seconds with my snailsman slime, and your berrymints will be just fine.
That was fucking amazing. I don't know what the fuck that was, but wow, that was amazing. Guys, I'll be right back.
From New York, this is Democracy Now!
And someday when we do finish that long journey towards freedom, when we do form a more perfect union, whether it's years from now or decades or even if it takes another 2 centuries, John Lewis will be a founding father of that fuller, fairer, better America.
President Barack Obama eulogizes civil rights icon, 17-term Congressmember John Lewis at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. We'll also play remarks of the senior pastor, Raphael Warnock, and the Reverend James Lawson. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once described Lawson as the leading theorist and strategist of nonviolence in the world.
We will not be quiet as long as our nation continues to be the most violent culture in the history of humankind. We will not be quiet as long as our economy is shaped not by freedom, but by plantation. efficient capitalism that continues to cause domination and control rather than access and liberty and equality for all.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The daily U.S. death toll from COVID-19 continues to climb with over 1,000 deaths reported nationwide Thursday for the fourth day in a row. Florida recorded a new record death toll for the third straight day with 253 new deaths. Even as the outbreak flared to a new record high, officials in Miami-Dade County suspended all drive-through and walk-in COVID-19 testing until next Tuesday, as Tropical Storm Isaias strengthened into a hurricane over the Caribbean and barreled towards southern Florida. COVID-19 is now on track to become the third leading cause of death in the United States this year after heart disease and cancer. In Chicago, 28-year-old COVID-19 survivor Mayra Ramirez spoke to reporters Thursday after recovering from a double lung transplant at Northwestern Memorial Hospital.
I think that I definitely have a purpose, and if that purpose is just simply telling my story to raise awareness for people to, stay safe and take this condition seriously.
The U.S. economy suffered the largest three-month collapse in its history during the second quarter of 2020, with the coronavirus crisis causing the equivalent of a 33% drop in annual economic output. The grim report from the Commerce Department came as lawmakers failed to agree to a new round of coronavirus stimulus spending. Enhanced unemployment benefits of $600 have now ended, as has a 4-month federal moratorium on evictions. As rent comes due, housing activists across the country are demanding local protections against evictions during the pandemic. In New Orleans, members of the Renters' Rights Assembly Thursday surrounded a courthouse that handles evictions, chaining themselves together under a banner reading "Evictions Equal Death," and blocking several landlords from entering the building. A similar action in Missouri Thursday also brought proceedings to a halt at a Kansas City eviction court. In Brazil, First Lady Michele Bolsonaro has tested positive for COVID-19 days after her husband, the far-right President Jair Bolsonaro, said he'd recovered from the disease after testing positive 3 times. Brazil has recorded more than 91,000 coronavirus deaths, second only to the United States. Spain recorded its biggest jump in daily coronavirus cases since ending a 3-month lockdown in June. Polish officials have imposed new restrictions on foreign travelers after Poland saw its biggest single-day spike in infections. Several French cities have announced new public health measures amidst a new surge in coronavirus infections. Meanwhile, in Greece, Doctors Without Borders says it was forced by local officials to close a COVID-19 center on the island of Lesbos, where more than 15,000 refugees are living in overcrowded and unhygienic conditions. Back in the United States, President Trump's facing bipartisan outrage after suggesting delaying the November election. Trump floated the idea Thursday morning at a time when nearly all polls project he'll lose against Joe Biden in November. Trump tweeted, quote, "With universal mail-in voting, not absentee voting, which is good, 2020 will be the most inaccurate and fraudulent election in history. It will be a great embarrassment to the USA. Delay the election until people can properly, securely, and safely vote," Trump tweeted. Voting experts say there's no evidence to back up Trump's claim. 5 states already conduct voting almost entirely by mail: Colorado, Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, and Utah. The president also does not have the constitutional power to postpone an election. Only Congress does. However, during a congressional hearing Thursday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo claimed the Justice Department can make that determination. Pompeo was questioned by Democratic Senator Tim Kaine.
Can a president delay a presidential election?
Senator, in the end, the Department of Justice, others will make that legal determination. We all should want, I know you do too, Senator Kaine, want to make sure we have an election that everyone is confident in. That's not only
Are you indifferent to the date of the election?
It should happen lawfully.
Right.
Yeah.
Even many Trump supporters have condemned the president's call to delay the election. Stephen Calabrese of the Arch Conservative Federalist Society wrote in a New York Times op-ed, quote, "This latest tweet is fascistic and is itself grounds for the president's immediate impeachment again by the House of Representatives and his removal from office by the Senate," unquote. The attack on mail-in voting comes at a time when the Trump administration is facing accusations it's sabotaging the Postal Service under the newly installed Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, a former Trump fundraiser. Since DeJoy took office, he has instituted a number of cost-cutting measures that have slowed down the delivery of the mail. The Washington Post reports there's now a days-long backlog of mail across the country. In Georgia, family members, lawmakers, dignitaries gathered to honor the life of civil rights legend and Congressman John Lewis, who represented Atlanta for more than 3 decades and became known as the conscience of the Congress. Former Presidents George W. Bush and Bill Clinton spoke, and Barack Obama delivered the eulogy. President Trump was notably absent. After headlines, will play excerpts from John Lewis's funeral service for the rest of the hour. Herman Cain, the former Republican presidential candidate and co-chair of Black Voices for Trump, has died at the age of 74 after a month-long battle with COVID-19. Cain's last public appearance came on June 20th when he tweeted a photo of himself at the Trump rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Cain wore no mask at the event, which featured thousands of people packed tightly together. He tested positive for the coronavirus 11 days after Trump's rally, where campaign officials discouraged mask use and were filmed removing social distancing stickers inside the arena. Cain was the former CEO of Godfather's Pizza and a cancer survivor. In 2012, he was briefly the frontrunner for the Republican presidential nomination, but later withdrew from that year's race after 3 women accused him of sexual harassment. In climate news, a record-shattering heat wave has settled over the Middle East, with temperatures soaring across Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and Syria. Baghdad recorded a high of more than 125 degrees Fahrenheit Tuesday, the highest temperature ever recorded in Iraq's capital city. Meanwhile, a months-long Arctic heat wave in Siberia has spread to Norway and northern Canada, melting permafrost, sparking wildfires, and bringing Arctic sea ice extent to a historic low. In Bangladesh, scores of people are dead, nearly 1 million homes flooded, and almost 5 million people displaced after torrential monsoon rains left nearly a third of the country underwater. New research published in Scientific Reports finds coastal flooding exacerbated by the climate crisis may damage assets worth up to $14.2 trillion by the end of the century. In news from the occupied West Bank, the general coordinator of the Palestinian BDS, that's Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions National Committee, was detained Thursday after Israeli forces raided his home in Ramallah at 3 in the morning. Mahmoud Nawaja was handcuffed and blindfolded in front of his wife and 3 young children. BDS movement co-founder Omar Barghouti said the arrest is part of an Israeli campaign to, quote, terrorize Palestinian BDS activists and their families, unquote. The Washington Post has revealed the Department of Homeland Security has compiled intelligence reports on 2 American journalists who published leaked unclassified documents related to the agency's tactics to repress protesters in Portland, Oregon. The targeted journalists were Mike Baker of the New York Times and Benjamin Wittes of the blog Lawfare. In Chicago, Immigration and Customs Enforcement is being flooded by fake applications for the agency's so-called Citizens Academy, a 6-week program where ICE plans to teach attendees defense tactics and firearms familiarization to arrest undocumented people. The protest was organized by the Jewish organization Never Again Action. Immigration activists have been sounding the alarm over the initiative, which ICE hopes to expand nationwide. This is Liz Castillo, an organizer with Detention Watch Network.
At best, this school will serve as yet another mechanism for the Chicago ICE field office to attempt to cover the harm it perpetuates every day. At its worst, this program, which includes training in defensive tactics, firearms familiarization, and targeted arrests, carries with it a lot of potential to foment racial profiling and violent vigilantism towards Black people and other people of color.
In Arivaca, Arizona, Border Patrol agents raided a humanitarian aid camp run by the group No More Deaths Thursday. One person was detained. The camp, located some 10 miles from the border with Mexico, is used to provide water, food, and medical attention to refugees crossing into the U.S. through the Sonoran Desert, where temperatures continue to rise above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The raid came one day after No More Deaths published documents revealing the Border Patrol Union, a pro-Trump and anti-immigrant extremist group, had instigated a June 2017 raid of the same camp, calling in support from BORTAC, the Border Patrol Special Operations Unit, the same unit that was recently deployed to Portland, Oregon to suppress protesters. A New York judge has unsealed 2,000 documents from a 2015 civil lawsuit filed against Ghislaine Maxwell, the British socialite who's accused of luring girls to be sexually abused by convicted predator and sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. In the documents, one victim, Virginia Giuffre, says, quote, Ghislaine Maxwell brought me into the sex trafficking industry. She's the one who abused me on a regular basis. She's the one that procured me, told me what to do, trained me as a sex slave, abused me physically, abused me mentally, she said. Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested earlier this month. Epstein died in prison last year. And in Washington, D.C., human rights groups held a drive-through birthday celebration outside the Embassy of Saudi Arabia Thursday in honor of the political prisoner and women's rights activist Loujain al-Hathloul. She was arrested in May of 2018 after leading a movement to lift a ban on female drivers and to overhaul the male guardianship system in Saudi Arabia. Ahead of Thursday's protest, al-Hathloul's sister Lena published this message.
Hi everyone, my name is Lena. I'm Loujain al-Hathloul's sister. Loujain's a Saudi activist who's been in prison for more than 2 years now. And worse than this, she has not given any sign for almost 2 months. She's going to spend her 31st birthday in prison. And so Loujain, wherever you are, I wish you a happy birthday. I wish you freedom. I love you, and I won't let you down, I promise.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Family members, lawmakers, 3 living former U.S. presidents gathered in Atlanta, Georgia Thursday to honor the life of civil rights legend, 17-term Congress member John Lewis, who represented the city of Atlanta for more than 3 decades and was known as the conscience of Congress. John Lewis died July 17th at the age of 80. Thursday's service marked the end of a homegoing journey that began over the weekend in Troy, Alabama, where he was born, carried his body onward to Selma over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and Washington, D.C., then to Atlanta. Former Presidents George W. Bush and Bill Clinton each spoke at the service, and remarks from Jimmy Carter, who doesn't travel due to coronavirus, were read aloud. President Barack Obama delivered the eulogy. President Donald Trump was notably absent. Interestingly, John Lewis boycotted both Donald Trump and George W. Bush's inaugurations and was an early outspoken critic of the Iraq War. The funeral took place at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, once led by Martin Luther King Jr. and his father. Dr. King nicknamed John Lewis the boy from Troy when they first met in Montgomery in 1958. In a minute, we'll hear the words of President Obama and civil rights legend Reverend James Lawson. But first, Reverend Raphael Warnock gave the opening remarks as he presided over the funeral.
We praise God for John Lewis. And as we gather in this house of God, we're reminded that as a teenager, he actually wrestled with a call to ministry. A farm boy, he used to preach to the chickens. I guess you have to start somewhere. And at age 16, he preached what we Baptists call his trial sermon in a little country church. But as his life took shape, instead of preaching sermons, he became one. He became a living, walking sermon about truth-telling and justice-making in the earth. He loved America until America learned how to love him back. We celebrate John Lewis. At a time that there is so much going on in our world, the news cycle is packed and moves at a dizzying pace. Yet for the last several days, It is as if time stood still while a nation takes its time to remember him. And I rise simply to ask, in this call to celebration, what is it that has summoned us here and caused us to slow down, to linger for a little while with so much swirling around us? We're summoned here because in a moment when there are some in high office who are much better at division than vision, who cannot lead us so they seek to divide us, in a moment when there is so much political cynicism and narcissism that masquerades as patriotism, here lies a true American patriot who risked his life and limb for the hope and the promise of democracy. We celebrate John Lewis, beaten and battered, but never bitter and always unbowed. On a bridge in Selma, he stared down bigotry and brutality and tyranny and won. How did he do it? The great-great-grandson of slaves, he received a spiritual power born of suffering, a moral audacity that transcended human station and called upon the human law to more closely align itself with the law of love. Howard Thurman said, by some amazing but vastly creative spirituality, the slave undertook the redemption of a religion that the master had profaned in his midst. John Lewis's ancestors met a man named Jesus in the brush harbors of Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi, and John Lewis received that faith and took it with him across that bridge in Selma and every other bridge. We've come to celebrate John Lewis. So let us be clear. When President Lyndon Baines Johnson picked up his pen to sign the voting rights bill into law, what he etched in ink had already been sanctioned by blood. The blood of the martyrs, the blood of Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, two Jews and an African American who were murdered in Mississippi, the blood of Viola Luiso, the blood of John Lewis. We celebrate John Lewis. He was wounded for America's transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. So let's remember him today, and let's recommit tomorrow to standing together and fighting together and voting together and standing up on behalf of truth and righteousness together. We'll get through this together. Let's save the soul of our democracy together. Let's worship the Lord. Let's worship the Lord together. Thank God for John Robert Lewis.
Senior Pastor Raphael Warnock of the Ebenezer Baptist Church. He's actually running for the U.S. Senate in November, speaking at Thursday's funeral for John Lewis in Atlanta. You can see our full interview with Warnock earlier this week at our website, democracynow.org. When we come back, we'll hear from the Reverend James Lawson, a civil rights icon himself, and former President Barack Obama. Stay with us. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on. Singing Precious helped to form the student non-tree gathered in Atlanta Thursday. This is Democracy Now!, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman, as we bring you highlights from the funeral of Congressmember John Lewis, who died July 17th at the age of 80. 3 living U.S. presidents, lawmakers, and activists from around the country gathered in Atlanta to honor Lewis, including the Reverend James Lawson, a civil rights icon himself who helped to train John Lewis in nonviolence when Lewis was a student in Nashville. Lawson is 91 years old. He helped to form the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, that John Lewis would go on to lead as chairman. In April 1960, Ella Baker invited Lawson to give the keynote speech at SNCC's founding meeting in Raleigh, North Carolina. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once described Lawson as the leading theorist and strategist of nonviolence in the world. Reverend Lawson addressed mourners gathered at the Ebenezer Baptist Church to remember John Lewis on Thursday.
I've read many of the so-called civil rights books of the last 50 or 60 years about the period between 1953 and 1973. Most of the books are wrong about John Lewis. Most of the books are wrong about how John got engaged in the national campaign of 1959-60. This is the 60th year of the sit-in campaign, which swept into every state of the Union, largely manned by students because we recruited students, but put up on the map that the nonviolent struggle begun in Montgomery, Alabama, was not an accident, but as Martin King Jr. called it, Christian love has power that we have never tapped, and if we use it, we can transform not only our own lives, but we will transform the earth in which we live. I count it providential that as I moved to Nashville, Tennessee, dropping out of graduate school, in Nashville came people like Kelly Miller Smith and Andrew White and Janetta Hayes and Helen Roberts and Dolores Wilkerson and John Lewis, Diane Nash, C.T. Vivian, Marion Barry, Jim Bevel, Bernard Lafayette, Paulina Knight, Angela Butler. How all of us gathered in 1958 and 59 and 60 and 61 and 62 in the same city at the same time, I count as being providential. We did not plan it. We were all led there. And when Kelly Miller Smith and the Nashville Christian Leadership Council met in the fall of 1958, and we determined that if there's to be a second major campaign that will demonstrate the efficacy of satyagraha, of soul force, of love truth, that we would have to do it in Nashville. And so I planned, as the strategist and organizer, a 4-point Gandhian strategic program to create the campaign. We decided with great fear and anticipation we would desegregate downtown Nashville. No group of black people or other people anywhere in the United States in the 20th century against the rapaciousness of a segregated system ever thought about desegregating downtown, tearing down the signs, renovating the waiting rooms, taking the immoral signs off of drinking fountains. But it was black women who made that decision for us in Nashville. I was scared to death when we made that decision. I knew nothing about how we were going to do this. I had never done it before. But we planned the strategy. John Lewis did not stumble in on that campaign. Kelly Miller Smith, his teacher at ABC, invited John to join the workshops in the fall of 1959 as we prepared ourselves to face violence and to do direct action and to put on the map the issue that the racism and the segregation of the nation had to end. And so in the 60th anniversary of that sit-in campaign, which became the second major campaign of the nonviolent movement of America, those are not my words. John Lewis called what we did between 1953 and 1973 the nonviolent movement of America, not the CRM. I think we need to get the story straight because words are powerful. History must be written in such a fashion that it lifts up truly the spirit of the John Lewises of the world. And that's why I've chosen just to say a few words about it. Kelly Miller Smith invited John Lewis. I met a Fisk student who told me about a student from Chicago who wanted to do something about those vicious signs. I said, invite Diane Nash to the workshop in September because we're going to do something about those signs. I pushed this hard. Now, John Lewis had no choice in the matter. You should understand that. Because all the stories we've heard this morning of John becoming a preacher, preaching to the chickens and other sorts of things, becoming ordained as a Baptist minister. Something else was happening to John in those early years. John saw the malignancy of racism in Troy, Alabama. There formed in him a sensibility that he had to do something about it. He did not know what that was, but he was convinced that he was called indeed to do whatever he could do, get in good trouble, but stop the horror that so many folk lived through and in this country in that part of the 20th century. John was not alone. Martin King had the same experience as a boy. I had the same experience from age 4 in the streets of Massillon, Ohio. Matthew McCullough, a pastor whose name you don't know in South Carolina, had the same experience. C.T. Vivian had the same experience. I maintain that many of us had no choice to do what we tried to do, primarily because at an early age we recognized the wrong under which we were forced to live, and we swore to God that by God's grace we would do whatever God called us to do in order to put on the table of the nation's agenda. This must end. Black Lives Matter. And so between 1953 and 1973, we had major campaigns year after year. Thousands of demonstrations across the nation that supported it. We had folk in the Congress, folk in the White House, folks scattered across the United States who were beginning to formulate what the solutions are for change. The media makes a mistake when John is seen only in relationship to the Voting Rights Bill of 65. However important that is, you must not remember that in the 60s, Lyndon Johnson and the Congress of the United States passed the most advanced legislation on behalf of we, the people of the United States, that was ever passed. Head Start. Billions of dollars for housing. We would not be in the struggle we are today in housing if President Reagan hadn't cut that billions of dollars for housing, where local churches and local nonprofits could build affordable housing in their own communities, being sustained and financed by loans from the federal government. We passed Medicare. We passed anti-poverty programs. Civil Rights Bill 64, 65, voting rights bills. A whole array. John Lewis must access to the tree of life. That's the only way to honor John Robert Lewis. No other way. Let all of us in this service today, let all the people of the USA determine that we will not be quiet as long as any child dies in the first year of life in the United States. We will not be quiet as long as the largest poverty group in our nation are women and children. We will not be quiet as long as our nation continues to be the most violent culture in the history of humankind. We will not be quiet as long as our economy is shaped not by freedom, but by plantation capitalism that continues to cause domination and control rather than access and liberty and equality for all. The forces of spiritual wickedness are strong in our land because of our history. We have not created them. John Lewis did not create them. We inherited them. But it's our task to see those spiritual forces. I've named them.
Guys, we did it. Well, sort of did it. We listened to the news, did some yoga, did a whole episode of Today Explained, so I guess we did do it. And then half an episode of Democracy Now! To like 60-minute episodes. We celebrate John Lewis. To garden or not to garden. There we go. Alright. To garden or not to garden. Noodle, don't noodle. You're too worried about what once was and not what will be. However, there's a saying. Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery. But today is a gift. That is why they call it the present. Guys, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate it. And I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you soon.